The Art of Thought by Nguyen Duy Can. Book Summary, Chapter 1, The Concept of Thought. If someone has never seen a crossbow and you tell them, a crossbow is a crossbow, you're not explaining. You're playing hide-and-seek with their mind, reminiscent of Hugh Tu's philosophy. A Warring States period philosopher recounted this story as a sharp critique of empty reasoning. Every concept, no matter how profound, must be grounded in imagery, examples, and experience. This isn't about simplification. It's about returning knowledge to the life it belongs to. One can utter 1,000 words about philosophy, but if thought cannot be defined with soul, it all remains mere intellectual smoke and bones. Thought, in its true sense, is the capacity to judge, to choose, to compare, to paint one's own picture of the world. Thought is not a collection of clever sayings. It's the way one arranges chaos into order, transforms ambiguity into light, and shifts from hearsay to clear understanding. What makes this chapter so vital isn't that it teaches you how to think, but rather that it shows you how you haven't been thinking. Most modern people, amidst the oversaturation of the internet and self-help books, don't truly think. They repeat, label, and copy beliefs handed down by others, calling them personal opinions. But in reality, these are unconscious legacies, passed down like heirlooms no one has ever bothered to unwrap and examine. If you believe something without ever questioning it, that belief is not a product of thought. It's an underlying dogma, potentially stemming from the crowd, school, parents, or an unhealed wound. What makes thought an art of living is that you don't just think to be right, you think to be honest with yourself. And here lies the most paradoxical yet profound truth. To truly think, you must be willing to abandon the thoughts you once called your own. Because it's very possible they are masks you wear merely to exist more comfortably in this world. In a sharp passage, the author states that not everyone possesses true thought. To be precise, most people lack original thought. They merely borrow the thoughts of others to frame their own behavior. They live by slogans drilled into their minds, by ready-made arguments, and by value systems that have never been re-examined. Like someone walking a forest path, they believe they're going the right way because they see footprints of those before them. But they never ask where those footprints lead, who that person was, or why they walked that way. Thus, this chapter is not merely a philosophical lesson but a challenging invitation. Start over. Shake off all habitual, well-worn ways of thinking. Sit down and look squarely at the question, why do I believe what I believe, and is that belief truly mine? Thought, in the author's view, is not a tool to win arguments against others. It is an internal mirror. If you gaze long enough, deep enough, you will encounter parts of yourself you don't wish to see: blindness, delusion, and the fear of being wrong. Precisely for this reason, thought demands courage, not the courage to speak, but the courage to be silent and re-examine oneself. There are thoughts you will have to abandon, even if they've been with you for decades. There are beliefs you will have to tear apart, even if they once saved you in a moment of weakness. And there will be times you must admit you weren't truly thinking, you were merely defending yourself with thoughts. Imagine standing before a mirror not to check your hair or clothes, but to look directly into your own brain, at how you think, react, and choose. We delve deeper into the nature of judgment, a word that seems simple but conceals a universe of prejudice and habit. People believe they're judging right from wrong based on reason, but in most cases, what manipulates their decisions are undigested emotions, the need for gratification, the fear of opposition, the desire for consensus, for belonging. In other words, they don't judge with their minds, but with their wounds. Someone living in a prejudiced society will easily label something wrong or immoral if it doesn't align with their familiar biases. Someone who has experienced failure in love easily becomes bitter when judging others' romantic relationships. And someone who has been insulted by power will label every action of those in authority as cruel, even when it's not. That is thought born from trauma, not from sobriety. But the danger doesn't lie solely in emotions. It's also in underlying dogmas, something people rarely recognize in themselves. You might believe that men must be strong, women gentle. You might believe that money is the measure of worth. You might believe you must live as a decent, traditionally moral person. But have you ever asked, who said so? And is that truly right for you at this point in your life? Underlying dogmas are roots deeply embedded in the subconscious. They don't need proof. They exist like air invisible, yet utterly controlling. And when you fail to identify them, you live like someone hypnotized, reacting according to pre-programmed instincts, yet believing it's free choice. It is here that the author issues an unsparing warning. If you don't learn to re-examine your thoughts, you will become its slave, like a soldier so loyal they dare not ask why they must shoot. False thoughts. These are fragments of knowledge we gather from books, lecture halls, from the words of respected figures, and because they sound right, we turn them into foundations for living without verification. These are phrases like, life must have goals, only success brings happiness, intelligent people never fail. Sound familiar, don't they? But that very familiarity is the trap. For we forget that every truth needs to be placed in a specific context, and humans cannot live by slogans. False thoughts are like luxurious suits that don't fit. They look impressive when worn, but inside, they're itchy, constricting, and suffocating. But because everyone else wears them, you dare not take yours off. You fear being called strange, rebellious, or different, so you wear it and slowly die within that very respectable facade. That's when you need to learn to rethink thinking. You'd expect to be told, you should think this way. Step 1 is ob, step 2 is CZ. Instead, he throws you into a vast ocean and says, swim. You must learn to ask questions yourself. You must doubt what seems too obvious. You must dare to say, I'm not sure. I don't know. I need to rethink. It is the moment you abandon the illusion that you understand everything that true thought is born. Thought, when properly cultivated, can become a guiding light for one's entire life. It doesn't tell you where to go, but it shows you where you stand. And that is the most important thing, because once you see yourself clearly, you will no longer live in the obscurity of being led. You will be the one choosing the path, not the one being pushed along. Chapter 2, What is Reasoning? There's a strange paradox in human intellectual life. People often pride themselves on knowing how to reason, yet they don't truly understand what reasoning is. They imagine that speaking coherently, with evidence, citations, and a few foreign words sprinkled in, is enough to be reasonable. But deep down, they're operating on a completely different mechanism, not to discover truth, but to protect what they already believe. What is reasoning? The answer, however, pulls back the curtain on a labyrinth of diverging paths. Reasoning, by common definition, is moving from the known to the unknown. But the author dismisses this definition, arguing that it's not reasoning, but invention. Reasoning is not creation, but verification. It doesn't build something new, it illuminates what already exists to reveal truth from falsehood, right from wrong. And at this moment, we touch upon a crucial point. Reasoning is not a path to truth, but a blade to separate truth from illusion. This means, if you reason merely to reinforce existing beliefs, you are acting contrary to the nature of reasoning. You're not searching for anything, you're just embellishing your ego. But if you use reasoning as a mirror reflecting your own thinking, you will clearly see what you truly understand and what you merely think you understand. There are 3 classic forms of reasoning: deduction, induction, and analogy. They may sound dry, but the author's narrative makes everything come alive like an adventure through the labyrinth of perception. Deduction moves from a broad principle to a specific consequence. For example, if you believe all people die and you are a person, then you conclude you will die. Sounds certain, doesn't it? But wait, the author warns, deduction is highly prone to error if the initial principle is false. If you're wrong at the root, every subsequent branch of reasoning is just a chain of fallacies adorned with logic. Induction, conversely, moves from many specifics to derive a general conclusion. You see 100 white swans and conclude that all swans are white until you encounter a black swan and your entire belief system collapses. Induction is dangerous because it relies on quantity but is never enough to guarantee truth. And in an age where people love to say, many people think so, the trap of induction becomes more perilous than ever. Analogy is the most common form, used by everyone yet rarely recognized. It's when you compare 2 similar things to draw a conclusion. For instance, the Earth is a sphere, a ball is also a sphere, so the Earth can roll like a ball. Sounds logical, but not necessarily true, because things that are superficially similar don't necessarily share the same essence. Analogy is easily misleading because it evokes a sense of familiarity, and humans are very quick to believe something if it seems similar to something they've experienced. But the problem isn't just with the forms of reasoning. The most dangerous thing, according to the author, is that people often don't use reasoning to find truth, but to prove what they already want to believe. They use reason to legitimize emotions. They employ logic as a tool for defense, not to see errors, but to conceal them with eloquent words. And it is here that the author makes a chilling assertion. Most human reasoning is designed for self-deception. This statement is like a knife plunging into the ego of those who still believe they are thinking logically. But if you are brave enough to accept it, you will see a door open the possibility of dismantling all assumptions to begin thinking anew. He tells of an intelligent friend, skilled in reasoning, who read many philosophy books, but in arguments, he always sought to silence his opponent rather than to clarify the truth. And after a long time, that person no longer knew what they truly believed and what they had merely fabricated to win a debate. Such is the tragedy of those who turn reasoning into a weapon instead of a compass. The problem isn't that people reason incorrectly, but that they don't know they're reasoning incorrectly, and worse still, they believe they are absolutely, unequivocally right. To dissect the intricate layers of self-deception, the human brain uses to protect what it wants to believe. 1. Equating two non-identical things. This is a type of reasoning often used when people say, opposing the government is treason, a false equivalence between a specific action and a broad concept. Or, disbelieving in religion means having no morals, as if faith were the sole proof of virtue. This way of thinking is popular because it's easy. It creates a binary world of right-wrong, black-white, friend-foe. It makes life simple, easy to control, easy to judge. But this very simplification is a betrayal of the multifaceted nature of truth and reasoning. True seriousness is a journey of embracing complexity instead of fleeing it. 2. Taking the conclusion as a premise asterisk. This happens when you start with what you want to prove, then construct all arguments around it as if it were already true. For example, because the soul is immortal, we continue to exist after death. But who has proven the soul is immortal? No one. You merely take that as a foundation to build an entire house of thought, and you live in that house as if it were built on rock, while it drifts precariously on fog. 3. Substituting emotion for reasoning. This is what modern society is drowning in. People don't analyze, they react. Someone says something that makes them feel hurt, they immediately conclude it's wrong. An idea makes them uncomfortable, they deem it toxic. A differing viewpoint, they call it immoral without bothering to consider its logical validity. Emotion has usurped the place of reason. And so, instead of thinking, people are merely reflecting. 4. Reasoning by authority. That's when people don't examine the content but rely solely on the speaker's position, reputation, or academic degree to believe what is said. The professor said so, so it must be true. He's an expert, so I believe him. These phrases sound familiar and seem reasonable. But the problem is, even experts can be wrong. And if you don't verify, you're handing over your thinking to someone else to hold. Thought is not power, it is responsibility. This means you don't reason well to surpass others, you reason well so as not to betray yourself. Because if you believe wrongly, you will live wrongly. And if you live wrongly long enough, you will lose the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood, not just in the world, but within your own soul. The smarter people are, the more easily they reason incorrectly. Why? Because intelligent people are skilled at justification. They are adept at concealing gaps in their thinking with persuasive rhetoric. They create an internal logical world so complete that they fail to see it doesn't align with reality. In other words, intelligence without humility becomes a trap. Start by not believing too quickly. When you hear something that sounds reasonable, don't rush to nod. Ask, what are its premises? Are there any hidden assumptions? Am I agreeing because of emotion, familiarity, or fear of being different? And most importantly, could it be wrong? It is in the ability to ask such questions that you open the door to independent thought. You no longer live by the reasoning systems of others, but begin to build a foundation for yourself. Though initially fragile and crude, it is the only path to maturity. If you reason correctly, you don't need to win. You just need to see clearly and live authentically. Chapter 3. The Art of Criticism. If you've ever been silenced by a painting, not because it was beautiful, but because it made you feel small and that you'd understood nothing, then the art of criticism is not a weapon to criticize others, but a scalpel to dissect your own thoughts. In an age where everyone has an opinion, to think critically, one must possess a profound critical faculty. This means not everyone who reads books, is educated, or is intelligent has the capacity for criticism, because criticism at a deep level is an art and a science demanding both intuition and intellectual discipline. Subjectivity and objectivity. Subjectivity is feeling. Intuition can sometimes be profoundly insightful, like an artist seeing what others don't. But the author does not delve deeply into it here, because his goal is science, logic, clarification, and objective criticism, meaning methodical criticism is the sharpest weapon in the journey of mastering thought. To practice critical thinking, the author offers a seemingly simple list, but if correctly applied, it will shake the very foundations of how you've thought until now. First, be honest with yourself. This isn't a moral virtue but a mandatory condition, because if you deceive yourself, all subsequent reasoning is just lipstick on a crooked mirror. Next, possess a fair mind. Fairness isn't neutrality, it's the ability to see both sides, even the side you dislike or don't want to hear. A fair-minded person can listen to an enemy speak truth without distorting it due to prejudice, and that is harder than climbing a mountain. Because each of us carries a fortified stronghold built from the past, from family, culture, and experiences of hurt. True criticism is the journey through that fog. Prudence and patience, because thought, once infected by error, is not easily peeled away like an onion. And if we lack enough patience, we easily fall into two extremes, either blindly accepting just to be done with it, or denying everything to protect the ego. Both are the death of critical thinking. He introduces a special critical method often used in historiography, but also extremely useful for anyone learning to think. This is dividing criticism into two branches, external criticism and internal criticism. External criticism questions the context of a thought. Where did this document come from? Who wrote it? Under what circumstances? What was the objective? Was it influenced by power, politics, belief? This is the first step to seeing that a thought doesn't fall from the sky. It has roots, motives, and biases. Internal criticism, on the other hand, dissects the content itself, carefully reading each argument, each piece of evidence. Is the author consistent? Are words used clearly? Is there evidence? Is that evidence trustworthy? Are there internal contradictions? And most importantly, does that thought align with what we know to be true, not because we've heard it many times, but because we've verified it through experience? Why does he say that? Because between those two questions lies an abyss, the abyss of misunderstanding, the danger of the illusion of knowledge. This is when you read a lot, know many concepts, and believe you've achieved understanding. But in truth, understanding is not the accumulation of facts. Understanding is the ability to pierce through the shell of language to reach the living spirit of a thought, and that cannot be achieved unless you dare to doubt both the author and yourself. To criticize correctly, one must first live authentically. For a dishonest person in life cannot be fair in thought. One who refuses to examine their own mistakes cannot clearly see mistakes in the thoughts of others. One who cannot listen to their own pain will always consider argument a contest to win, not a journey to seek what is right. If thought is a knife, then reasoning is how we wield that knife. Cut in the right place and clarity emerges, just a slight slip, and you cut yourself. It has only one value: to prevent us from making logical errors. Reasoning, the author says, is merely like a touchstone for gold. It can tell us what is false, what is contradictory, what is untrustworthy, but it cannot create truth. You can construct a system of reasoning that is tightly logical down to every joint. But if the starting point is flawed, the entire castle is merely an illusion. And this is the fragile point for those who place their faith in absolute logic. They forget that reality does not operate by formulas. There are things so absurd they astound us, yet they are obvious truths. And there are things that sound perfectly logical but turn out to be just a veneer of paint over a fictional shell. People often think, if I say something reasonable, I am right. If I reason well, I will be believed. Not because it's wrong, but because it exceeds our current understanding. We misunderstand not because we are ignorant, but because we are unaccustomed to looking outside our familiar framework. There are philosophical doctrines, political systems, and religions built very methodically, logically, and orderly. But when applied to real life, they crumble not for lack of reasoning, but for failing to align with real people, with the real world. Reasoning can satisfy us, but only truth allows us to live between what we think and what is happening. And that collision frequently ignites conflict between reason and emotion, between what should be and what is, between imagination and reality. Therefore, the author introduces an extremely important concept, the spirit of harmony. This isn't about compromise, nor is it a weak reconciliation between right and wrong. The spirit of harmony is the ability to live within the tension between extremes without being torn apart by any single one. It is the capacity to maintain reason without losing emotion, to be steadfast in principles without being rigid in situations, to be both free and bounded. He divides the spirit of harmony into 3 types. 1. Emotional harmony. These individuals act based on compassion, love, and gentleness. They can forgive, empathize, and put themselves in others' shoes. But without reason, they are easily swayed by emotion, susceptible to manipulation, and prone to irrational decisions. 2. Intellectual harmony. This type of person thinks carefully, possesses deep insight, and can connect disparate pieces into a comprehensive picture. They know how to step back to see the whole picture, but if they only have intellect without heart, they become cold, indifferent, and lack the ability to connect with others. 3. Harmony of will asterisk. These individuals possess the ability to act persistently, are not easily swayed, and don't readily give up. They overcome both emotion and reason to push forward guided by a strong inner conviction, but if unchecked, they can become stubborn, autocratic, or cruel. The spirit of harmony is therefore not about choosing one of the 3, but learning to maintain all 3 in a creative tension. Like a symphony, each instrument has its highs and lows, but none can be missing. But reform cannot begin with mere compassion. The story closes there, but opens a long silence. What is missing in an intellect that does not know how to pause for humanity? Chapter 4. Subjectivity and Objectivity. On the small table of life, humans lay out all sorts of judgments. One might say, "That's beautiful." Another replies, "It's ugly." One person declares, "He's right." Another shakes their head, "Completely wrong." The strange thing isn't the difference, but that no one asks themselves what they are judging and by what standard asterisk. A strike against intellectual laziness, that sweet laziness hiding behind strong assertions. Because most of the time, we don't think with our heads, but with memories, emotions, and ego. And so, what we call truth is often just a personal projection, stamped with the label of reality. Between a statement like, "This table is round," and "This table is very beautiful," lie 2 entirely different worlds. The first statement is a description. It neither loves nor hates, nor demands agreement. The second is a perception. It is laden with love and hate, desires, and prejudices. But ironically, in daily life, these 2 types of statements are used interchangeably, as if there were no boundary. Value judgments are what we make most often, yet we believe we are stating facts. To praise someone as good means they are good for us or fit our standards asterisk. To condemn an action as bad is also a reflection from our personal moral framework. And if we cannot distinguish between objective and subjective, we will live in a quagmire of intellectual chaos without ever knowing it. Every type of judgment has its own cost, but the greatest cost is when we apply it in the wrong place. You cannot use emotional metrics to evaluate a law of physics, just as you cannot use mathematical logic to deny someone's pain. The confusion between subjective and objective not only harms thought, it destroys the capacity for communication, understanding, and empathy. People often make value judgments believing they are making factual judgments. They love and call it right. They hate and call it wrong. They want and call it truth. These seemingly simple words expose an entire hidden mechanism of the ego. And if you are brave enough to look at it, you will understand why the world is so divided today. Not due to a lack of information, but a lack of discernment learning to be aware of when you are making a subjective judgment. This means you can still say, "I don't like that." But don't say, "That is wrong," if you have no basis beyond your emotions. Imagine you are standing in a room full of mirrors. Each mirror reflects a different version of truth. Some are distorted, some exaggerated, some make you look better or worse. That is the current state of judgment in modern life. Images everywhere, but rarely truth. I see it that way, and that's how it is. This is the intersection of subjective and objective, where very few people pause long enough to ask, Am I looking at the object, or am I looking at myself through asterisk the object? According to the author, factual judgment is a type of judgment supported by verifiable evidence. It doesn't require you to like or dislike it. Truth doesn't need consensus. It only needs a demonstrable foundation. For example, water boils at 100 deg C is a verifiable statement. Whether you are sad, happy, love, or hate, water still boils at that temperature. But I find winter truly lonely is a judgment imbued with personal nuance, which cannot be scientifically right or wrong. However, objective truth is not immune to subjectivity, because the observer always wears colored glasses when looking at the world. That doesn't mean you can't understand truth, but you must always be vigilant about what is fact and what is the feeling clinging to that fact. Thought is the translator, while phenomenon is the original text. A good translator retains the original spirit but always adds personal nuance. A poor translator completely distorts the meaning, and most people don't even know they're translating. They believe they are speaking the original text directly. Freedom is the supreme value. Sounds right, but what does freedom mean here, and why is it supreme? Perhaps for someone else, safety is more precious. We are often hypnotized by grand words: justice, democracy, morality, freedom, love. But each of these words carries a different meaning for each person. And if we don't pause to peel back the layers of language, we will live by reflexes, not by thought. For this reason, the author doesn't hesitate to say directly, one must question even the most sacred things, not to demolish them, but to understand them more deeply, more truly. My child is an excellent student. Is that a fact or a perception? If based on grades, it might be true. But what if based on all aspects? Independent thinking, creativity, life skills, or when a teacher assesses, this student is smarter than that one. What is being measured here? IQ, quick-wittedness, or the fact that the other student is quiet and doesn't please the teacher? It is in such situations that subjectivity often dons the cloak of objectivity, and the speaker and, sometimes even the listener, fails to recognize this exchange. This chapter not only teaches you to analyze, but also helps you become a more honest interlocutor with others and with yourself. If everything is subjective, does anything objective remain? He doesn't answer hastily. He leads us into a deep alley where truth is no longer a blazing lamp but a tiny, flickering light at the end of an endless corridor. You're not sure you're going the right way, but you must keep going. Otherwise, you'll only be repeating echoes in others' minds. Subjectivity and objectivity don't give you a clear-cut formula for distinction, but teach you to live in the gray area with an inner light. It advises you to assert less, be less certain, to think less that you understand. Because sometimes, the very moment you admit, "I'm not sure," is when true thought truly begins to blossom. Chapter 5, Belief in Knowledge. As you read these lines, millions of people worldwide have stepped out of their homes with a belief. Sometimes they don't even know they're believing. They act, love, get angry, vote, choose careers, worship, all stemming from something they believe to be true. But the most alarming thing is not that they have beliefs, but that they never question them. Have you ever asked yourself where your beliefs come from? Are they the result of contemplation or merely a legacy of habit, an inner light or the shadow of the masses? Every value system, every action stemming from an emotion or idea believed to be true is a belief. You believe diligence outweighs intelligence, that men shouldn't cry, that education is the key to success. All are beliefs, even if you've never labeled them as such. And when that belief operates subconsciously in your mind, it becomes the root of all your thinking. This means you no longer truly think, you merely reason to protect what you already believe. And the greatest danger of belief is not its content, but its immunity to reason. He dissects belief by separating it into two zones, the emotional self and the rational self. The emotional self is the vulnerable, sensitive part of a person, easily moved, fond of comfort, and fearful of ambiguity. It loves belief, not because belief is true, but because belief makes it feel protected. Whereas the rational self always demands evidence, counterarguments, and is willing to confront uncertainty. Belief is therefore where the emotional self predominates. And when it rains, all rational arguments become heretical. You can present hundreds of pieces of evidence, but the heart has already made its choice. It chooses based on the need for peace, for certainty, for feeling like it belongs to something. Even the wise can be superstitious if their emotional self is stronger than their rational self. And so, don't imagine that education will save you from blind faith. Sometimes, those who think themselves wisest are the easiest to deceive themselves, because they possess enough rhetoric to rationalize their own beliefs. Pleasure, suffering, desire, hope, habit, and the way the social environment from religion, education, to media has shaped national beliefs that almost no one dares to question. Belief, in its deepest sense, is not something you choose, but something you need. Humans cannot live without something to cling to believe that life has order, meaning, rules that, if followed, will keep you from getting lost. In times of suffering or confusion, what humans seek first is not truth, but stability, and belief provides that, like an invisible handhold. Desire is not merely carnal lust but any intense longing, to be loved, to succeed, to excel, to be immortal. These cravings make people willing to believe anything that can satisfy them, no matter how irrational. Secondly, suffering. When in pain, humans need meaning. Loss, illness, failure all compel us to seek a system of explanation to continue living, and belief, regardless of its truth, is the first and last thing we grasp to avoid collapsing. So it's no wonder that hospitals and churches are fuller than bookstores, or that in war, faith outlives reason. Next, habit. Many beliefs exist simply because grandparents did it. Society is still that way. You no longer remember why you believe, only that you always have. And that habit, over time, hardens into a destined thought, like a well-trodden path that seems to be the only one. And finally, social pressure. We believe not just for ourselves, but because of others, because parents believe, because teachers believe, because the community believes. Sometimes we don't dare to think differently, not because we don't doubt, but because we fear isolation. Fear being the only child in class, not raising a hand in agreement. Fear being the strange one in a chorus of conformity. Humans need belief, and that is not bad. The bad only begins when we mistake our belief for truth and negate all others. Does having knowledge automatically free one from belief? The answer is no, because knowledge does not equate to wisdom, and certainly not to freedom of thought. Knowledge, if not tempered by a spirit of self-inquiry, easily becomes a credentialed sophist. You can read hundreds of books, possess dozens of arguments. But if you don't dare to question your fundamental premises, everything you learn is merely an accessory to pre-existing beliefs. There is a passage where the author recounts, chillingly yet hauntingly, about a scholar who once taught the philosophy of enlightenment. But upon witnessing a religious persecution, he remained silent, not because he didn't know it was wrong, but because deep within him still existed an old belief in necessary order, social stability, or the price of peace. And so, knowledge was swallowed by dogma. Therefore, true knowledge is not about having many words, but about daring to touch what one still fears. Daring to re-examine what one once lived and died for. Daring to say, I'm not sure anymore, about what was once one's soul. That is living knowledge, far removed from displayed knowledge. To truly think, one must dare to step through one's own beliefs, not to abandon them, but to look at them with sober eyes. You can still hold a belief, but don't mistake it for truth. You can still live with a belief, but without needing it to impose itself on the world. And if you can do that, meaning, hold a belief as an adult, not as a child needing protection, then that is the true freedom of thought. Chapter 6. The reasoning of emotion and desire. Have you ever argued with someone, and just as you exhaust all your reasons, they simply utter, I don't like it that way? You bring evidence and sources, yet they still shake their heads. As if in that game of reasoning, the winner isn't the one with logic, but the one with stronger emotions. There are types of reasoning that stem entirely not from truth, but from emotion and desire. Meaning, people don't use reason to seek truth, but use reasoning to rationalize what they want to believe, what they want to have, what they want to avoid. In other words, reason is hired as an attorney for the heart. He calls this the reasoning of emotion and desire. It sounds gentle, but in reality, it's a subtle form of self-manipulation. We don't reason to understand, but to defend. And at that point, reasoning is no longer a tool for finding truth, but a tool for constructing illusions. The frightening thing is that this reasoning is very intelligent. It's not foolish. It's logical, but off-center logic. Like a winding path leading to a destination you'd already chosen, even if the direct route is blocked by truth. When reasoning is swayed by emotion, it often has two characteristics. First, it accepts contradictions. This means people can hold two opposing beliefs without seeing any issue. For example, believing in compassion but still supporting cruel punishment for wrongdoers, or preaching tolerance but being unable to stand anyone with a different opinion. Those who reason by emotion don't need consistency, they only need comfort. The second is bias, meaning only seeing what aligns with oneself and ignoring what contradicts it. A type of conditional selectivity, like a lover only seeing their beloved's good points, even if everyone else sees only flaws. Or like football fans, the same foul if their team does it, it's clever. If the opposing team does it, it's dirty. This is not a rare phenomenon, but a universal nature. We have all been this way, and the hardest thing is not to change, but to recognize that we are this way. Even while believing they are objective, people often imagine that emotion and reason are two separate streams, like water and fire. But in reality, they intertwine like red threads woven through every layer of thought, never denying the role of emotion. On the contrary, it warns that when emotions are not recognized, they will masquerade as reason and manipulate all judgments without leaving a trace. When people are in pain, they reason not to understand, but to defend themselves. This means every argument, every word, every piece of evidence is merely a mental barrier, protecting something whose loss would cause them to collapse. Grieving betrayal, they conclude that no one in the world is trustworthy. Failing a project, they believe life is unfair. Hurt by a harsh father, they assert that all forms of discipline are toxic. In each of these examples, we don't see people being wrong, we see them trying to save themselves. And that is why emotional reasoning is dangerous. Because it's rational on an emotional level, but can be flawed on a factual level. As for desire, thigh duck, it is more subtle. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't make us yell at others, but skillfully bends reason to legitimize what we want. Someone craving status will reason that power is necessary to achieve great things. Someone greedy for money will believe that money is a neutral tool, it's good or bad depending on the user. Someone obsessed with beauty will believe that beauty is an expression of harmony and nobility. When reasoning is driven by desire, it becomes a one-way journey. You are no longer seeking answers, you are only seeking evidence to reinforce the answer you've already chosen. And then, thinking is no longer thinking, it is defense. To reason soberly, one must learn to listen to one's own emotions and desires, as if they were a third party neither hated, excluded, nor idolized. Simply recognize them. A person who knows how to think is not someone who eradicates emotions, but someone honest enough to say, "This is what I am feeling, but I will not let it blind my reason." To reason correctly, start where you are most prone to error, not where you lack knowledge, but where you want too much, fear too much, love too much, hate too much. In other words, start from the heart, but don't let it sit in the driver's seat. Reading, the art of thought, is not like walking a clearly signposted road. It's more like stepping into a forest where every leaf carries a question, every turn is a cognitive challenge, and every step demands self-reflection. This is not a book to find comfort. This is a book for you to learn to accept ambiguity and still move forward with profound appreciation. Not because it offers definitive answers, but because it dares to ask uncomfortable questions in an age where people fear doubt, uncertainty, and being wrong. He chose to dismantle human thought into pieces, not to destroy, but to see more clearly. Few possess enough patience and courage to write a book whose greatest reward for the reader is profound, reflective silence. For you who have just completed this journey, I don't ask for praise. I only hope for honesty. What did this book make you think that you hadn't thought before? What did it shake that you thought was solid? If anything, leave a comment not to add another voice, but to etch the trace of an intellectual collision. And if this book hasn't moved you, your silence is also a response worthy of respect. Because sometimes, what makes a book valuable is not that it's loved, but that it makes us unable to read it as a detached observer. Books don't exist unless read by an open mind, and an open mind is rare. But I believe if you've listened this far, you are one of them. The Art of Thought serves not as a mere book, but as a mirror for us to gaze into and, if brave enough, to remake ourselves.